you remember from yesterday the conversation about reading-related shame, the downward spiral of shame. That as children experience this triggering shame, that the shame causes a shock, it breaks down their capacity to pay attention to what they're learning from, right? And it builds up over time to kind of infect them with a easily triggered shame, which they want to avoid, and they learn to avoid by how they talk to themselves, how they come to accept in themselves that they're not smart, they're no good, they'll never learn this. And that protects them from the bad feeling, but it does so at the expense of creating a self-identity that's going to shame them from then on. So, just as healthy learning is a learning that is kind of a scaffolding, a dynamically reconfigurable scaffolding that continues the ability to extend their learning. And unhealthy learning is misdirecting their ongoing capacity for learning, either cognitively or emotionally. And the big part of all this is clearly emotional. So, shame's a perfectly natural emotion. Right? In a way, it's the emotion that most makes us human. It's the emotion that causes us to pay uncomfortable attention to ourselves. Right? If we look at all of the things that we fear, I touched on this yesterday, the thing human beings most fear, other than death or serious imminent danger or injury to themselves, or serious injury to one they love, or death of one they love, almost everything else that we're afraid of on a daily basis. And this is what I meant by first-person learning. Don't take my word for it. And I'm not trying to say take a bunch of experts' word for it. I'm saying that you have in your daily experience evidence for everything I'm talking about. Yes?
I just would like to make a point that's sort of a little...
Fine.
Here it goes. Okay, at the risk of shame,
yes.
Allow me to say...
Always.
I spent the last several years, my early career was in education, and I spent the last several years working in corporate environments and working with adults.
Yes.
And a couple of points. One is, all of this relates to the audience I've been addressing for the last 15 years.
Yes.
And secondly, for those of us who are, and I'm moving back to education.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. But my point is, the parents of the children that we're dealing with have all these same issues too. And it seems to me that we can't look at the child. It's real important to remember that.
Absolutely.
Don't look at the child in isolation. You've got all those same shame issues with
yep.
the parents.
And
who've been coming into my classes in corporate settings for years.
If you were to ask me what's the biggest single learning challenge for children, it's the fact that they can't help but take care of their parents emotionally.
Yeah.
Right? And that becomes profound learning disability.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? And the biggest thing that the kids are doing is avoiding triggering their parents' shame. And they're watching their parents' shame. And they're learning not to do the things that cause their parents to be shamed. So that's why there's such a recapitulation in low literacy families. The parents are avoiding being involved in literacy practices because of how it makes them feel. The kids are watching that saying, I don't want to do that either. Right? So yes, absolutely. That's what I mean by from the moment of birth on, we are learning our way. And no question that the most powerful learning environment is the parental family field. It is a learning environment.
So how within, and I don't have an answer to this, but I just throw it out there, how within the setting of formal education do you invite the parent in a way that doesn't expose shame or cause shame, and at the same time facilitates the learning that you want to happen? I don't have an answer to that.
I wish we had more time. I mean, I could spend a day on that question, right? But I mean, the bottom line of it is we've got to recontextualize the emotional context of learning challenges that have caused people to become ashamed of their minds, right? Because what you're describing is, and that's why I brought this one thing up. Let me come back to this as we close, and or after the fact, I'll be happy to talk to anybody about anything related to all of this. When we feel shame, there's basically two human responses to it, right? Both of which are actually avoidance mechanisms. One way that we avoid shame is to overcome whatever we think is the source of it, the cause of it, right? So if we feel bad about ourselves in some aspect, sometimes that means motivating us to exercise or practice or whatever, right? That's one approach. The other approach, the more common approach, the one that it's happening in all of us, is to avoid it, right? And if we're really honest with ourselves, if we really start to watch ourselves, we'll see that we kind of go through our daily life, unconscious for the most part, moving around all of the possible interactions with the world that could cause us to feel shame. It's an almost automatic, unconscious, pervasive thing that's going on in all of us. And here's the difference. Here's the important distinction. By the way, before I go to those distinctions, it's important to remember that shame in and of itself isn't a bad thing. Right? It's how we've learned to relate to it where the problem is. Without shame, did anybody think you could potty train a kid who never felt shame? And yet run amok, what is it that is causing the greatest number of teen suicides? Shame. Right? Now, we're shamed about lots of things. We have shame issues about our appearances. Right? If you think about it, watch this. To help pull yourself into this awareness even more, watch the commercials that you're being bombarded with. Most of them are causing you to feel shame for not being good enough because you don't have something or not doing something or not using something. And then they're solving the fact that they just triggered the shame in by taking your money to alleviate it with whatever they're selling. Right? We have behavioral issues, like the poor smokers that are huddled outside, right? Now, if I said, how many of you are smokers? Raise your hands. Anybody believe that there's no smokers in this room? Okay. See? Most anger is a consequence. There's a whole science of this. Anybody watch the Lie to Me TV show? Yeah, remember that? Okay, not enough of you. It was based on this fact that you could read facial affects. That there's a certain, underneath the surface of the way we think about emotions, there's kind of core emotional circuitry that in this case, this one master could read underneath whatever you think you were broadcasting to what were really going on inside of you emotionally. It's based on the same science. So performance issues. This is one of the... I first became aware of this. I was out for a walk with I was in my early 20s with a then brother-in-law. Right? We walked by a bowling alley, and I said, let's go bowl a couple of frames. And he says to me, you know, I tried that once, and I threw a gutter ball. I'm never going to do that again. And that's such a metaphor, right? I mean, there's all kinds of things that we're ashamed of. Math anxiety. How many people here love to do math? Oh, okay, good. How many of you is the rest of you, how many of the rest of you don't like math? Okay. Now, how many of you that don't like math think it's a consequence of some kind of genetic, neurobiologically ordained difference in your ability to do math? That was quick. And the thing is that the majority of our math problems are a consequence that early in the unfolding of learning math, right? We weren't conducted into it in a way that was actually right for how we could learn it. And the consequence of that, like with reading, was that we came away thinking there's something wrong with me. I'm not smart. I'm not good at math. And the consequence of that was it skewed our trajectory with relation to math from then on, right? And we now go through life kind of avoiding it wherever possible, which is the main problem with reading, too. It's not just the initial confusion, it's what the kids learn in relation to it. Now, all of these are examples of very specific
Right.
Yeah, okay. No, I'm not saying dyslexic. Okay?
Anybody with learning problems whatsoever, it must have been because they went through these things.
That must have been. I would say this. The majority of people that are struggling with learning-related issues are struggling with unhealthy learning, either at the cognitive misdirection or at the emotional aversion. Yes?
But there's nothing wrong in their brain, perhaps, or...
No. I'm not saying that... I mean, let's look at it. 84% of African American fourth grade children, 64% of all children in every school in this country are reading below proficiency for their entire school experience. 64%. Now, maybe 10% have something, and I doubt it. I think it's less than 5. Somewhere between 5 and 10, depending on what expert, would say these are children that had some kind of genetic, neurobiologically innate difference in the wiring of their brain that made learning that difficult. So maybe 5 to 10% have something innately skewing their learning, their processing, that's causing their problem. 10 times that number are in trouble, not because of anything innately different or wrong in them, but because of their learning environments. That's what I'm saying. You don't think so? Yes?
I think, whether you're dyslexic or learning difference, you teach that child in a way that they learn.
I know that, but I'm a parent, though, and I'm dyslexic also, and my daughter's severely dyslexic. I know how to teach her. School did. This lady over here knew how to teach her. Most people didn't. She's still not where she ought to be. I'm getting ready to send her off to college. All 3 of my kids display some of this in math, especially. And it's not because, I don't believe that because they just hate math or whatever. They all seem to make the same kind of errors.
Yeah, but what's the source and genesis of the errors? Right? Is it neurobiological?
The numbers, the way they view the numbers, they don't have capacity. Right, such as a local psychologist told me, looking at my daughter's auditory processing disorder, stop trying to teach her multiplication tables. It's fruitless. You're just pushing her. She's not going to get it, and it doesn't make any difference for her.
Right.
She can't, it's in there somewhere.
Yeah.
She can't retrieve it. So, but you're saying, oh no, this doesn't.
No. I'm not particularly saying that your child is one way or another.
No, I don't mean,
I'm saying generally with respect to the population as a whole, right? The majority of children that are struggling on account of the things we've been talking about. Which isn't to say that there isn't a subpart of that population that are struggling, at least their initial struggle is because of innate differences. Then I would add to that the kids that have innate differences, their problems are then exacerbated by the things I've been talking about. Right? But I'm not saying all children are this way. There is there's evidence that I've talked to the head of the National Center for Learning Disabilities. I've talked to the president of the International Dyslexia Association. I've talked to people that study this at the research level. Even Reed Lyon last night, when he was talking about dyslexia, he wasn't saying we have some kind of genetic signature. We can prick their fingers when they're babies and tell you you're going to be dyslexic. We know that you're going to be dyslexic because we can't seem to reach you with our conventional methods of teaching. It's an inverse. We back into the number. Which isn't to say, again, that there aren't children that are born for a variety of different reasons. That's nobody's fault. I'm not trying to lay fault here. In which the way that they come into the world, the way that their brains are wired up, either due to genetics or neurobiological formulative issues, has skewed how they process in a way that makes it difficult for them. Remember, reading and math are technological, conventional inventions. Nothing about evolution set us up for this. The children that have problems with this, they may have been the masters of the universe in a world where literacy and math didn't matter. Right? I'm just saying that for most of the people that are struggling, right, most of the children that are struggling, most of the 64% of the kids in school that are below proficiency with reading, most of the kids that can't stand mathematics, most of the kids that are struggling in whatever it is they're struggling, their struggle is a consequence of what they've learned in terms of the cognitive approach that they're having and the emotional one. Because here's the thing, and I wish I could spend more time with this, and after the fact, after the event, I'll hang out and talk with anybody who wants to. I got to close in 4 minutes. So, I got to move on. And I'll just say that you just saw me run through the list of some of the things, just some of the things that we're prone to be shameful about, right? And here's the question, just to live with this one question. It's one thing if I'm ashamed of bowling, I say, I'm just not going to go bowling anymore. It ain't a big deal. It isn't going to affect the trajectory of my life when I have to bowl, or to golf, or to do whatever, right? And I may not like the way I look in the mirror, but it's not going to affect me in every dimension of my existence. But what happens when that shame associates with my mind? What happens when I become ashamed of my mind? And the power that we've been talking about avoiding things, now is avoiding using my mind. What happens when I'm ashamed of my learning? What happens when I'm ashamed of the feeling of being confused, which I think is at the root of the reading problem? When as soon as I start to feel confusion, I feel ashamed. Like somehow this confusion means there's something wrong with me, something not right with me, that I'm not good enough. And so I developed this, just like reading, this faster than I'm even aware of, automatic, unconscious avoidance that wants to avoid feeling confused. What happens to my life trajectory is if I'm a child and I develop an avoidance, an emotionally smart, automatic, super powerful avoidance that wants to avoid feeling confused? What happens to my life?
Well, I think for some kids, like I had a son who's dyslexic, they get lucky and they have parents who find a solution. But if they don't have parents, they lose.
Yeah.
And they go on the spiral downward because there's no way for someone to say, even if you can't do this, you have other qualities that make you special.
Right.
And
No, I
that's
understand.
what
I understand. And
But can I say I had an aha moment just a second ago? Because I'm here because I'm that mother that is now a school board member trying to push and shove a school board to do something else.
Yay, congratulations.
But the aha moment I just had is it's not just the students that have mind shame, it's the school board, it's the school people also have mind shame.
It's our population.
It's hard for them to say, I really don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And the harder I push sometimes, the harder it is for them to say, I really don't know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not. It's our population is learning disabled.
Well, because you're felt to feel shameful if you are not competent.
So yeah.
So then you overcompensate for that lack.
Yeah. So we got politicians that got to be like this with rigid.
Right, and they're looking for for, I want to buy a program off the shelf
Yep.
that will solve.
Institutionally convenient push button stuff, yes.
And there are so many programs that are out there that say, here's the 5 things of reading that the scientists tell us we have to do. Come buy our program and it will solve your reading problem. And trust me, that is very powerful for a school district that has to meet AYP.
Yeah, I understand. I really do. Look, I have to close
Thank
now.
you for my aha moment.
Thank you for having it. I'd love to help you with your school board. So the takeaways in all of this: stewarding the health of our children's learning, center of action as parents and educators, right? We can't do that unless we can read unhealthy learning. Unhealthy learning has these 2 components. It can be the cognitive, right? Habitual cognitive stuff that misdirects the opportunity to learn, the capacity to learn, and the big monster of them all, mind shame. That instead of just being ashamed of one little facet of myself, I'm ashamed of my mind. I'm going to go through life trying to avoid feeling confused because I don't want to have that feeling. And if I go through life avoiding feeling confused, I'm going through life avoiding learning. If I go through life avoiding learning, what does it look like? It looks like our population today. And what can you do? Throw out the experts. Use them as a reference library, but not as a substitute for your own learning. You have in yourself every day an opportunity to observe mind, shame, and action in yourself and everybody around you. The more that you let that in, the more that you take that in, the more that you experience what I'm talking about with learning, with mind shame, with the difference between healthy and unhealthy learning. The world is your oyster. It's all over the place. It's on television ads. It's in the relationships you have with everybody around you. The evidence is there. Right? Let your first person learning kind of deepen this conversation. Because my point is that the deeper you go into this, the more this becomes not what somebody said to you, but something that you own, you understand, it's in your gut, it's in your heart, it's in your mind, it's real for you. The more that that's going to affect everybody around you in terms of how healthy the learning is that you're stewarding.